When did thinking become an act of defiance? We live in a world flooded with opinions, yet starving for reflection. The very act that once defined human progress, pausing, observing, questioning, now feels outdated, even suspicious. In a culture that moves at the speed of impulse, silence is mistrusted and depth is dismissed as delay. You are rewarded not for asking meaningful questions, but for delivering fast answers. The world no longer waits for wisdom. It scrolls past it. This is not a small shift. It's a collective forgetting. Once, to think was to participate in truth. Now, to think too long is to be left behind. Children are taught to memorize rather than to wonder. Adults are trained to perform certainty rather than embrace curiosity. Speed wins, noise wins. The mind, overwhelmed by the flood of images and headlines, begins to choose comfort over clarity. And so, quietly, thinking itself becomes dangerous, not because it harms others, but because it threatens the machinery of the surface world. What happens when we replace attention with automation? When contemplation becomes a luxury and doubt is seen as weakness? Slowly, we abandon the soul of inquiry, and in its place, we build personas that mimic intelligence but run on pre-approved scripts. We speak in slogans, not insight. We share content, but not contact. Somewhere in this digital storm, we begin to lose the one thing that once made us human, the courage to think for ourselves. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." In today's world, that avoidance has become systematized. Thinking too much slows the algorithm. Reflecting too deeply unsettles the tribe. In this age of performance, truth is no longer sought. It is curated. And those who dare to stop and truly see may find themselves lonely, misunderstood, or labeled as difficult. But perhaps that's exactly the point. Perhaps thinking has become dangerous because it still holds power, because it still invites freedom, because it still awakens something real, and that they cannot control. Have you ever paused to wonder why you can no longer sit in silence without reaching for your phone? Why the momentary stillness of waiting in line or lying in bed feels so unbearable that you must escape into scrolling? Beneath this habit lies a quiet tragedy. Your inner world, once rich with reflection, has been hijacked by noise masquerading as connection. In a world where we are constantly stimulated, endlessly pinged, and subtly manipulated, the real danger is not just distraction, but disintegration, the slow erosion of the self beneath an avalanche of digital content that never lets you hear your own voice. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in while you're multitasking, while you're replying to a message mid-meal, while you're reading headlines but never books, while you're numbing your anxiety with reels, posts, and carefully curated lives that don't even belong to you. We were not designed for this kind of sensory warfare. Our grandparents processed meaning in the slow burn of books, handwritten letters, and honest face-to-face conversations. But now, we absorb 5 times more data but retain less essence. We know everything, yet understand nothing. And it's not because we're careless or unintelligent. It's because our brains are drowning. The more overstimulated we become, the more we rely on heuristics, groupthink, and the comfort of popular consensus instead of inner clarity. Carl Jung warned that the loss of reflection is the birth of projection, and in this flood of noise, most people no longer live in reality, but in borrowed opinions, viral mimicry, and reactive emotion. Can you feel it in your body? That constant tension in your chest? That inability to focus for more than a few seconds before craving a dopamine hit? That panic when you realize you've forgotten how to be alone without a screen, a sound, or an escape. These are not personality flaws. They are symptoms of a soul in crisis. According to Jung, when the mind is overloaded and the ego is constantly reinforced by outer stimuli, the unconscious begins to revolt. You begin to project your repressed confusion onto the world. Everything feels like a threat. Every silence feels like abandonment. Every differing opinion feels like an attack. You lose the ability to hold nuance because your inner world has become fragmented, overwhelmed by noise that leaves no room for integration. And the result? You mistake stimulation for meaning. You chase clickbait instead of contemplation. You confuse popularity with truth. And most dangerously, you forget what your own thoughts sound like. This is how false ideas spread, not because people are stupid, but because they are too mentally exhausted to resist. Truth requires silence. Reflection demands space. And in the digital age, both are rare luxuries. But without them, you lose the anchor to your inner self, the one Jung called the totality of the psyche, the part of you that can discern truth not through logic alone, but through intuition, resonance, and symbolic understanding. So ask yourself honestly, when was the last time you sat with a feeling until it taught you something? When was the last time you read something slowly, without skipping, reacting, or scanning? When did you last experience stillness, not as punishment, but as presence? Are you truly thinking, or are you just consuming? Could your mental fatigue be the body's way of begging you to return to depth? In this moment of reflection, know this: the noise is not your identity, the chaos is not your destiny, and beneath the overwhelm, your soul still remembers silence. It is waiting for you in the spaces you've avoided. It is whispering through your exhaustion. It is calling you back to the sanctuary of your mind. Will you listen before the noise becomes your only language? What if the very act of sitting quietly with your own thoughts felt more frightening than scrolling endlessly through your phone? That is where many people unknowingly find themselves today. In a world that promises connection, stimulation, and answers at lightning speed, our ability to think deeply has been eroded not by force, but by seduction. The endless stream of content, notifications, and sound bites doesn't just distract us, it reprograms our minds to avoid depth altogether. Thinking used to be a practice of patience and curiosity, but now it is treated like an inconvenience that slows down the rhythm of modern life. Consider how easy it is to be swept away by the noise. News headlines change every few minutes. Videos autoplay before you decide if you even want them. Your phone vibrates with alerts designed to hook you. This is not random. Every beep and scroll is engineered to keep your attention occupied so that there is no space left for reflection. And when reflection dies, truth becomes invisible. We may consume 5 times more information than our grandparents did, yet feel emptier, more restless, and less certain about what is real. Carl Jung warned us that what is not made conscious will return as fate. The constant flood of stimulation is not neutral. It keeps us from confronting what lies within. Instead of asking, "What do I truly believe?" we find ourselves parroting whatever opinion is trending, afraid to fall behind or appear ignorant. In this way, our silence is bought with convenience, and our inner compass is traded for the quick relief of belonging. But have you noticed that the more you follow the crowd, the more lost you sometimes feel inside? This is the hidden danger of our time. Not that people cannot think, but that they no longer dare to. Thinking feels heavy in a culture obsessed with speed. Pausing feels rebellious in a system designed for reaction. To truly sit with a question, without rushing toward the comfort of certainty, requires courage. And yet, without this courage, we live borrowed lives, echoing what others want us to believe. The truth is that your mind is not weak. It is simply drowning in noise. The first act of freedom is not a dramatic rebellion, but a simple, radical choice: to slow down, to listen, and to let your own thoughts surface again. Have you ever wondered why some of the most thoughtful people often live in silence, quietly holding back their ideas even when they see what others cannot? The truth is, independent thinking comes with a hidden tax. It is not simply an intellectual act. It is an emotional risk. To think for yourself means to question not only society, but also the very foundations of your belonging. Every time you form a thought that diverges from the crowd, you risk being misunderstood, isolated, or even cast out. And in a world where acceptance feels like survival, the temptation to remain silent often outweighs the courage to speak. Many of us have experienced this in subtle but piercing ways. Perhaps you were in a family gathering where everyone repeated the same political opinion, and you hesitated to disagree because you feared judgment. Or maybe you sat in a meeting at work, sensing the flaw in the group's decision, yet swallowed your objection to avoid conflict. These moments seem small, but over years they accumulate like invisible weights on the psyche. Slowly, you learn that silence feels safer than thought, and compliance feels easier than the unease of standing alone. Carl Jung warned that conformity is not harmless. It is a betrayal of the self. When you suppress your thoughts, you are not only avoiding conflict with others, you are rejecting your own inner truth. The psyche does not forget this betrayal. It sends signals: anxiety that arises before you speak, dreams of being chased or silenced, a constant ache of not belonging even when surrounded by people. These are not random discomforts. They are the soul's rebellion against the exile of its voice. But why do we fear the act of thinking so much? Because true thought shatters illusions. To think critically is to confront paradox, uncertainty, and complexity. It forces you to admit what is unresolved and unfinished in yourself. And in a culture that worships certainty and quick answers, the admission of "I don't know" feels like weakness. We are trained to memorize slogans instead of wrestling with truth. As a result, we trade authenticity for safety and complexity for simplicity. Yet in that trade, something in us withers. The silent price of thinking for yourself is not just the rejection of others. It is the slow erosion of your inner vitality. You may still laugh, work, and socialize, but beneath the surface there is a sense of exile. You feel like a guest in your own life, performing the script others want rather than speaking your authentic lines. Over time, this exile becomes unbearable, and many cope by numbing, scrolling endlessly, overworking, or clinging to rigid ideologies that give an illusion of belonging. But what if the pain of this exile is not punishment, but invitation? Jung believed that discomfort is the first step toward individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. The anxiety you feel before speaking your truth, the dreams of silence or imprisonment, the loneliness that follows your refusal to conform, these are signs that your soul is asking you to stop betraying it. Thinking for yourself may be costly, but the greater cost is to never think at all. So I leave you with a question. Is it better to be silently accepted while living in exile from yourself, or to risk discomfort and rejection in order to belong to your own soul? The answer is not simple, but perhaps that is the point. True thinking is not about comfort. It is about courage, the courage to feel, to question, and to live as if your voice matters, because it does. Have you ever wondered how someone incredibly intelligent, someone who reads philosophy, questions systems, and sees through surface-level illusions, can still be emotionally manipulated, psychologically controlled, or even gaslit in a relationship or society at large? It seems like intelligence should protect us, yet history, relationships, and even politics show us otherwise. Smart people are not immune. In fact, they might be even more vulnerable in certain ways. Why? Because intelligence, when disconnected from inner awareness, can become a servant of the ego rather than a guardian of truth. The root of this lies in how the human brain is wired. Nobel laureate Daniel Kahneman, in his groundbreaking book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, describes two systems of thought. System 1 is fast, instinctive, and emotional. System 2 is slow, deliberate, and logical. While System 2 feels like the mark of intelligence, most of our day-to-day decisions are governed by the shortcuts of System 1. It's efficient, but dangerous. We rely on familiar patterns, emotionally charged narratives, and mental shortcuts that feel safe but often blind us to truth. Carl Jung warned that without deep self-awareness, the unconscious runs the show, and we call it fate. This is where manipulation takes root. People don't just believe what is true, they believe what feels familiar. The more intelligent someone is, the more skilled they often become at rationalizing that familiar illusion. This creates a dangerous loop where smart people defend destructive dynamics simply because those dynamics reflect old emotional imprints they haven't yet faced. Think about someone staying in a toxic relationship because the chaos mirrors a childhood environment they've normalized, or a highly educated individual falling for conspiracy theories that stroke their ego with a sense of secret knowledge. These are not signs of ignorance. They are signs of a mind hijacked by unhealed emotional complexes. Jung would call this the shadow, the unseen part of ourselves that governs us when we think we're in control. Now ask yourself, how many times have you defended an idea, not because it was right, but because it felt true? How many beliefs do you hold simply because they're yours? This isn't just a societal problem, it's deeply personal. Every one of us is susceptible to confirmation bias, groupthink, and the seductive comfort of certainty. And yet, there's a way out. Jungian awareness is not about becoming smarter. It's about becoming more whole. True intelligence is not the ability to memorize data or argue eloquently. It's the courage to sit with discomfort, to question the voice in your head, to admit when you're wrong, and to recognize when your mind is defending a wound, not a truth. So here's a question that may change your life. Are your beliefs protecting your soul, or are they protecting your ego? When you begin to question not just what you think, but why you think it, the manipulation loses its grip. The fog lifts. You begin to see through the illusion, not by force, but by light. This is the inner revolution Jung spoke of, not a battle of intellect, but a return to integrity. Because in the end, intelligence without self-awareness is like a ship with no compass. It may move fast, but it's lost. Healing begins the moment we slow down, turn inward, and dare to confront the truths that don't flatter our ego, but liberate our spirit. What if the thoughts you believe are yours, your opinions, your preferences, your judgments, were actually inherited, borrowed, or implanted by the world around you? How do you begin to separate the voice of your soul from the noise of the world? The truth is, most people never slow down enough to ask this. Life moves fast. We inherit beliefs from family, adopt behaviors from culture, absorb fears from media, and echo opinions from whatever tribe we subconsciously belong to. We mistake this accumulation for identity. But Carl Jung warned that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives and we will call it fate. The only way to reclaim your mind is to interrupt the spell. It begins with silence, with stillness, with choosing to pause instead of react. In a world of constant motion and opinion, the most rebellious act is to sit quietly with your own mind and listen, not to what it's been programmed to say, but to what it's trying to unlearn. This is where metacognition comes in, the ability to think about your thinking, to question, why did I respond that way? Who taught me that belief? Does this reaction come from truth or from trauma? This inner questioning is not judgmental. It's not about shaming yourself. It's about gently awakening the real you underneath the conditioning. Jung would say this is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. But this journey is not glamorous. It is subtle, repetitive, and quiet. It requires the humility to say, maybe I've been wrong. It demands the courage to engage in dialectical reasoning, to hold two opposing ideas in your hands without rushing to label one as evil and the other as good. In real life, this looks like being open to perspectives that challenge you, reading beyond headlines, listening without needing to win, creating space between stimulus and response, learning to feel uncomfortable without immediately fixing it. This is not weakness. This is freedom, and it is earned, not given. One woman I spoke with recently had spent her entire life parroting beliefs she picked up in a strict household. When she finally moved across the country and lived alone for the first time at age 47, she said, "I didn't know I had a voice until no one else was around to tell me what to say." That is the moment you begin to return to yourself. And it does not require running away. It requires returning inward. Krishnamurti once said, "The ability to observe without evaluating is the highest form of intelligence." It is in this quiet observation, without judgment, without rush, that your mental chains begin to loosen. Ask yourself, when was the last time you allowed your mind to wander, not scroll? When did you last feel awe without needing to explain it? Can you recall a moment when you changed your mind and felt more alive because of it? These are the cracks through which truth enters. This is the discipline of real thinking, not to harden the ego, but to soften it, not to win arguments, but to dissolve illusions, not to become right, but to become real. Reclaiming your mental freedom is not a single awakening moment. It is a quiet, daily act of returning. Each time you question your thoughts, slow down your judgments, or release the need to be certain, you come home to yourself. That is the great liberation Carl Jung pointed toward. Not freedom from the world, but freedom within it. A mind no longer at war with itself. A soul no longer hijacked by the past. A presence so still, the truth has no choice but to rise. There comes a moment in every psychological awakening when the ground beneath your old convictions begins to shake. Not because truth has disappeared, but because your identity was built upon borrowed certainties. The final layer of illusion isn't external, it's internal. It's the false self you protect when you cling too tightly to a belief system that once gave you meaning, but now limits your growth. And Carl Jung understood this deeply. He saw that the ego, when fused too tightly with ideology, becomes a prison. You are not your politics. You are not your religious affiliation. You are not the cultural scripts you inherited without questioning. You are not even your past. You are a consciousness that has the capacity to observe, evolve, and re-choose. That is where real transformation begins. To separate yourself from your beliefs is not betrayal, it is liberation. It is the moment you realize that the purpose of awakening is not to become more certain, but to become more conscious. Beliefs are scaffolding, but the soul is the architect. And when you mistake your scaffolding for your identity, you stop building, you stop questioning, you start defending things that no longer serve you. But when you have the courage to dismantle that scaffolding, to let light reach the forgotten parts of your mind, something miraculous happens. You stop reacting and start seeing. You stop fighting shadows and start illuminating your own. This is not intellectual detachment. It is emotional maturity. It is the sacred process of standing in the fire of opposing truths and not flinching, of hearing someone challenge you and instead of shrinking into defensiveness, expanding into curiosity. This is what it means to be spiritually sovereign, to recognize that identity formed around ideology is fragile, but identity rooted in awareness is unshakable. You no longer need to be right to feel worthy. You no longer need to win arguments to feel seen. You no longer need to belong to a tribe to feel real, because you've discovered the power of standing alone in the truth you keep uncovering. Layer by layer, you begin to see through the theater of persuasion, the emotional manipulation in media, the groupthink disguised as morality. You see how people become mouthpieces for collective trauma when they abandon introspection in favor of belonging, and you make a quiet decision to belong to yourself, to think with depth, to question with compassion, to choose truth over comfort, even when it costs you approval, especially when it costs you approval. Because this is what awakening really means. You realize that every belief is a mask, and once you've taken off enough of them, you meet something eternal beneath, something unnameable but undeniably you. It is not fragile. It does not need protection. It does not need to be explained. It simply is. That presence becomes your compass, your center, your source of clarity in a world designed to confuse. And so you lead, not by convincing others, but by living in alignment with what you've seen, quietly, calmly, deeply, because the truth, once integrated, no longer needs to shout. You are not your beliefs. You are the soul who outgrew them. And in that realization, freedom begins, not with rebellion, but with remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Let that remembering begin now. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.